When you hear the name Machiavelli, a certain image just pops into your head, right? Some shadowy figure, a master of the dark political arts, the guy who wrote the playbook for the ruthless. I mean, his name is literally an adjective now, a synonym for a cold, calculating way of doing things.
But what does being Machiavellian really mean? It's a word we throw around all the time, but where did it actually come from? Well, let's dig in, because the story of the man himself is way more surprising than the myth that surrounds his name.
Okay, so the dictionary gives us this: cunning, scheming, unscrupulous. It's this idea that the ends justify the means, no matter how dirty you have to get your hands. And yeah, on the surface, that sounds pretty simple. But to really get the Machiavellianism, you first have to understand the man. So let's pull back the curtain on this infamous label, because the first thing that might surprise you about the man who wrote the ultimate guide to power is who he actually was. No, really. The guy whose name is synonymous with absolute power wasn't a king, he wasn't a general. Niccolo Machiavelli was, for all intents and purposes, a government employee, a civil servant, a diplomat for the Republic of Florence, spending his days with budgets, writing reports, and grinding through negotiation.
And we're not talking about some orderly, polite era of debate. He was a diplomat thrown right into the total chaos of Renaissance Italy, a world of nonstop war, alliances that changed by the hour, and some truly brutal backstabbing.
For 14 years, this was his life, a constant trial by fire. One minute, he's trying to get a bunch of unreliable mercenaries to actually fight. The next, he's in France, trying to calm down a furious king. He had to go negotiate face-to-face with the incredibly cruel Cesare Borgia, and even followed the warrior pope, Julius II, on a military campaign. For him, politics wasn't some abstract theory. It was a daily fight for his city's very survival. And here's the crucial thing to get. His ideas about power didn't come from dusty old books. They were forged in the real world by looking ambitious kings, shady mercenary captains, and scheming popes right in the eye, all while trying to keep his beloved Florence from being completely crushed by them. So he's at the very center of Italian politics, a respected, effective guy doing his job. And then, in what felt like an instant, it all just came crashing down. He had given his whole career to serving the Florentine Republic. He was a real patriot, an official who had proven his skills and his loyalty again and again at the highest levels. But in 1512, everything changed. The political winds shifted violently. Spanish troops, backed by the Pope, defeated Florence's allies, and the powerful Medici family, who'd been exiled years before, marched back in to take over the city. For Machiavelli, the fall was swift, and it was brutal. First, he was fired, stripped of the office he loved. Then, he was arrested and even tortured, accused of being part of a conspiracy against the new Medici rulers, which wasn't true. Finally, even though he was innocent, he was exiled, banished to his little farm in the countryside, kicked out of the political world he had given his life to. So, okay, what does a brilliant political mind do when he's suddenly cast out, left with nothing in the only world he's ever known? He picks up a pen. But the book that would make him so infamous, it wasn't some grand philosophical project. It was born out of pure, raw desperation. That's right. The Prince was basically the world's most famous and intense job application. It was his desperate plea to the new Medici rulers, a way of saying, hey, you guys need me. I get how power really works. I can be useful to you. Please, give me a job. See, at the time, most books giving advice to rulers were all about morality. Be generous, be honest, be loved by your people. Machiavelli, leaning on his 14 years in the political trenches, just tossed all of that out the window. He said, in the real world, trying too hard to be a good man will often get a ruler destroyed. The number one job, he argued, is to keep the state secure no matter what it takes. And this leads us to his most famous or infamous piece of advice. He said that, sure, it would be great for a ruler to be both loved and feared. But if you have to choose just one, it is much, much safer to be feared. And why? Because love is unreliable, but the fear of punishment, that's always there. For him, this wasn't about being cruel for cruelty's sake. It was a cold, hard calculation for keeping order. So what was the result of this masterpiece of political realism, this desperate resume he poured his soul into? It was a total flop. The story goes that when Machiavelli presented his book to the young Medici prince, Lorenzo, the prince was way more excited about a new pair of hunting dogs he'd just gotten as a gift. Machiavelli never got his old job back.
He died an outcast from the political world he so desperately wanted to be a part of. But that failed job application, the one the prince just shrugged at, well, it got passed around, and eventually, it became his immortal and infamous legacy.
And for 500 years now, we've been arguing about what he really meant. Was he some teacher of evil, writing a how-to guide for tyrants? Or was he maybe the first real political scientist, just describing power not as we wish it was, but how it actually works? Or maybe he was just an Italian patriot, arguing that you had to use whatever methods were necessary to build a state strong enough to keep foreign invaders out. And that's really the ultimate irony of his whole life, isn't it? He wrote The Prince for an audience of one guy, hoping to get a modest government job. The book was a spectacular failure at what it was meant to do. But in that failure, it found an audience of millions across the centuries and made sure his name would never, ever be forgotten. So the next time you hear someone get called Machiavellian, maybe you'll think of this story. The story of a disgraced patriot writing from exile, maybe not to praise evil, but to lay bare the brutal realities of power as he had seen them with his own eyes. Was it a handbook for tyrants? Or was it a realist guide to survival in a very dangerous world? 500 years later, that's still the question he leaves us with.